Have you ever seen someone's hope just crumble? Right there in front of you?
I did.
It was the look on an elderly gentleman's face, leaning heavily on his cane, his shoulders slumping as he watched the very last accessible parking spot get snatched away. Stolen. Really? By a woman in pristine yoga pants driving an SUV that cost more than his house probably did. A woman who, I suspected even then, didn't need that spot any more than she needed another designer handbag. That image, the quiet defeat in his eyes juxtaposed with her blatant, unearned confidence, it burned itself into my mind. It sparked something in me, a slow burn that would eventually ignite. Little did that woman, let's call her Brenda, know, her entitled little parking hack wasn't just inconvenient, it was cruel. And her routine disregard was about to come crashing down very, very publicly. Stick around, because you need to hear how this particular brand of arrogance met its overdue reckoning. My life usually operates at a pretty steady hum. I work in healthcare administration, tucked away in an office building that's part of a large complex. We share a multi-level parking garage with a busy medical center and, significantly, a Veterans Affairs clinic. It's a place filled with purpose, you know? People coming for treatment, families visiting loved ones, doctors rushing to save lives, and veterans coming for the care they earned through sacrifice. My own grandfather, bless his heart, served in the Navy. He came back changed, quieter, carrying things he never spoke about but that you could sometimes see flicker behind his eyes. He always walked with a slight limp from an old injury he brushed off as nothing. Because of him, maybe I've always felt a profound respect, a sense of quiet debt, to the men and women who served. Seeing them navigate the often challenging path to the VA clinic always resonated deeply with me. As a woman working in this environment, you become sensitive to the unspoken struggles, the visible burdens people carry. My job itself is all about organization, schedules, files, smoothing out the logistical bumps in the healthcare road. I'm not naturally confrontational. Honestly, I prefer to keep my head down, do my work, and avoid drama. The parking garage was just parking. I typically parked on the higher levels, enjoying the few minutes of quiet walking before diving into the day's tasks. I barely registered the prime disabled spots near the elevators, except to be vaguely glad they existed for those who truly needed that close access, people with mobility issues, chronic pain, folks who couldn't manage the long walk from the far reaches of the garage. Those blue-painted rectangles represented something important: accessibility, respect, a small measure of ease in what might be a difficult day. They were sacred ground in a way, or they should have been, until Brenda decided they were her personal VIP section. The first time Brenda registered on my radar, it wasn't just a blip, it was a full-on siren blare of entitlement. It was one of those bright, chilly mornings where your breath fogs slightly. I was heading towards the elevators for my parking spot when I heard it, the sharp, impatient tone of a woman's voice cutting through the low rumble of the garage. Near the main entrance walkway, right beside a clearly marked disabled spot, the scene unfolded. There she was, Brenda, maybe mid-40s, clad head to toe in gleaming white athletic gear that looked like it had never seen a bead of sweat. Sharply angled blonde bob, check. Oversized sunglasses pushed on top of her head like a tiara, check. Large, expensive-looking SUV parked at a careless angle, half in the disabled spot, half encroaching on the striped access aisle beside it, double check. The trifecta of "I'm more important than you." The target of her impatience was an older gentleman. He looked frail, his back slightly stooped, leaning noticeably on a sturdy wooden cane. His car, an older but immaculately clean sedan, had a disabled veteran license plate. He was idling just behind her SUV, his window down. His voice was gentle, polite, but you could hear the underlying strain. "Ma'am," he was saying, gesturing with a slightly trembling hand towards the spot she was obstructing. "I have an appointment upstairs. I really need this spot. Could you perhaps pull forward just a bit, so I can get in?" Brenda didn't even grant him the courtesy of a full glance. She flicked a dismissive wave over her shoulder, her perfectly manicured nails catching the fluorescent light. "Oh, honestly," she sighed, loud enough for me, several yards away, to hear clearly. "Just find somewhere else. I'm literally running in for 1 second. It's not a big deal." She punctuated this by grabbing a large, ostentatious tote bag from her passenger seat. 1 second? The veteran looked taken aback. "But this is a designated disabled space," he persisted, his voice soft but firm. "And your vehicle is blocking it entirely." Finally, Brenda turned, pushing her sunglasses down her nose to peer at him over the rims. Her expression was pure condescension. "Look," she snapped, her voice dripping with disdain, "I'm in a hurry. Major meeting. You can wait, or you can go park up on level 5 with everyone else. It won't kill you." She slammed her car door with a resonant thud that echoed in the concrete space, hit the lock button, chirp chirp, and strode off towards the medical building entrance without a single backward glance, leaving the veteran sitting there, blocked and dismissed. I froze. Just stood there by a concrete pillar, feeling a mix of disbelief and hot, rising anger. The sheer audacity. The utter lack of empathy. The veteran didn't say anything else. He just watched her disappear. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, he carefully put his car in reverse. I watched him maneuver slowly, painstakingly, around her hulking SUV, the effort it took him clearly visible. He then drove slowly up the ramp, presumably heading towards the much less convenient upper levels, adding a significant, painful walk to his VA visit. My hands had clenched into fists at my sides. Every instinct screamed at me to chase after Brenda, to unleash a torrent of righteous fury. But I didn't. What would it accomplish? A shouting match? Security being called? Her denying everything? The moment passed. She was gone. But the image of the veteran's slumped shoulders, the sound of his sigh, the entitled flick of Brenda's wrist, those stayed with me. It felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. And that little switch inside me, the one that flips at profound unfairness, it clicked firmly into the on position. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. My initial gut feeling proved chillingly accurate. Brenda wasn't an anomaly. She was a recurring menace. Seeing her white SUV jammed into an accessible spot became a grimly predictable part of my week. Sometimes she'd take the spot closest to the VA clinic entrance, other times the one nearest the main medical center elevators. She seemed to favor the corner spots, often parking diagonally, maximizing the inconvenience she caused. If someone dared to be parked correctly in an adjacent spot, she'd leave mere inches between their car and hers, making it impossible for them to open their doors fully, let alone deploy a ramp or maneuver a wheelchair. Her flimsy excuses remain the same. Just grabbing something, be right back, emergency call, always delivered with an air of extreme annoyance, as if the person questioning her was the one being unreasonable. But her emergencies often lasted hours. I'd see her car sitting there, a monument to selfishness, when I arrived at 8:30 a.m., and it would still be squatting in the same spot when I left for my lunchtime walk at noon. Sometimes, it was still there when I headed home at 5 p.m. Her behavior grew, increasingly brazen. The incident with the orange traffic cone wasn't a one-off. I saw her do it again, essentially claiming a public, essential spot as her private reserve. I witnessed her cutting off a woman pushing her elderly mother in a wheelchair, forcing the woman to swerve dangerously close to a pillar, just so Brenda could snag the spot first. Brenda's reaction? Not apology, but an annoyed glare, as if they were in her way. The impact on those who genuinely needed the spots was undeniable and painful to watch. I saw more veterans with canes and walkers circling the lower levels, their faces etched with frustration, sometimes exchanging resigned glances with each other before heading up the ramps. I saw parents struggling to unload children with special needs from vehicles parked far away, their journeys made significantly harder. One rainy afternoon, I saw a woman on crutches, soaked to the bone, having to navigate the long, slippery path from the upper levels because Brenda's SUV occupied the last covered, accessible spot near the entrance. And Brenda's interactions with anyone who dared challenge her became legendary, in the worst way. Dave, the older security guard, tried approaching her again. This time, I saw Brenda roll down her window, unleash a rapid-fire volley of abuse, accuse him of incompetence and harassment, and threaten to call his supervisor and have him fired. Dave, clearly trying to avoid escalation, eventually just had to back off, looking utterly dejected. She seemed to relish the power she felt in intimidating people. One morning, her parking directly impacted me, albeit slightly. She had parked so badly angled in a spot near the elevator bank I usually use that I couldn't quite squeeze my modest sedan past her car's protruding rear end without risking a scrape. I had to back up, navigate a different aisle, and use a different elevator, adding 5 minutes to my commute and a fresh layer of irritation to my already simmering resentment. It was minor, yes, but it was another small demonstration of her complete lack of consideration for anyone else sharing the space. I started documenting everything more meticulously. Dates, times, spot numbers, duration of her stay, brief notes on who she inconvenienced, veteran with cane, woman with stroller, etc. Summaries of her interactions with security. My phone's notes app became a depressing chronicle of Brenda's reign of parking terror. It felt almost obsessive, but seeing the real-world consequences of her actions fueled my resolve. This wasn't just bad manners. It was actively harming people who were already facing challenges. The garage felt less like a functional space and more like Brenda's personal playground, and the unfairness of it all was becoming unbearable. I knew, somehow, I had to find a way to make it stop. The dam of my frustration finally broke on a gloomy Tuesday. The air in the garage was thick and damp, carrying the smell of exhaust fumes and impending rain. I was running slightly behind schedule, which meant parking closer to the main elevator core than usual. And there it was, like a beacon of arrogance, Brenda's gleaming white SUV, executing a flawless, swift turn into the very last accessible spot near the medical center entrance. No hesitation, no looking around, just took it. Normally, this would be the point where I'd mentally curse her, maybe take a picture for my evidence log and walk away, feeling helpless. But today, something snapped. Maybe it was the sheer predictability of her selfishness. Maybe it was the cumulative weight of all the times I'd seen her dismiss, inconvenience, and potentially endanger others. Maybe it was the memory of my own grandfather's quiet struggle after his service. Whatever it was, passive observation was no longer an option. I watched her hop out, smoothing down her expensive jacket, adjusting her ever-present sunglasses. She locked her car with that infuriatingly cheerful double chirp and began her confident stride towards the main glass doors connecting the garage to the medical building lobby. An idea sparked, reckless perhaps, but necessary. Instead of heading to my usual elevator, I lingered, pretending to dig through my purse for something. I needed to know. Was there any shred of truth to her running an excuse? Was she actually finally going to the clinic? Part of me, a ridiculously naive part, still clung to the hope that I had misjudged her, that there was a legitimate, hidden reason. She pushed through the doors into the bright, busy lobby. I waited a beat, then followed, keeping my distance, trying to blend in with the flow of people. I watched her walk purposefully across the polished floor. She didn't glance at the information desk. She didn't head towards the elevators marked patient clinics or VA services. She kept walking, straight ahead, towards the doors on the far side of the lobby, the ones leading to the covered walkway. My pulse quickened. This was it. I slipped out through the same doors just moments after her, staying behind a group of nurses chatting. The walkway connected the medical complex to our adjacent building. And on the ground floor of that building, nestled amongst a few other shops, was the Serenity Now-Day Spa. I watched, holding my breath almost, as Brenda breezed past the boutique coffee shop, ignored the high-end clothing store, and, with the confidence of a regular customer, pushed open the frosted glass door of the spa. The little bell above the door chimed, announcing her arrival. I stopped just outside, partially concealed by a large, strategically placed planter. Through the spa's front window, I saw her laughing and chatting animatedly with the woman at the reception desk. She gestured, pointed at a brochure, nodded, and then disappeared through an inner door, presumably heading back for a massage, a facial, or whatever luxury treatment awaited her. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was all a sham. Every excuse, every argument, every single time she stole one of those vital blue spots, it was all a calculated lie. She wasn't sick. She wasn't visiting anyone sick. She wasn't dealing with any kind of emergency. She was deliberately, consciously abusing the disabled parking system, exploiting the proximity to the medical center as free, premium parking for her spa appointments and shopping trips. She knew exactly who needed those spots: the veterans, the elderly, the people with disabilities she cut off and dismissed, and she simply did not care. Her comfort trumped their needs, every single time. The simmering resentment I'd been carrying exploded into pure, cold fury. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with adrenaline and outrage. This wasn't just entitlement, this was predatory. This was despicable. Suddenly, my little log of her offenses didn't feel petty anymore. It felt like crucial evidence. Because now I knew the full extent of her deceit. And there was absolutely no way I was letting her get away with it any longer. The game hadn't just changed. It was about to end. The universe, it seems, sometimes provides the perfect stage for justice. About a week after my spa discovery, a Thursday afternoon, I was heading out for a late lunch. The garage was relatively quiet. As I walked towards the exit, I saw it unfolding like a slow-motion train wreck I somehow had the power to stop. Brenda's white SUV was cruising down the main aisle towards the entrance. Simultaneously, approaching from the opposite direction, blinker ticking rhythmically, was the old, familiar sedan. Behind the wheel, leaning forward slightly as if scanning intently, was the same elderly veteran from that very first encounter, the one whose image had fueled my slow burn of anger for weeks. He was clearly aiming for the single remaining accessible spot, the one closest to the pedestrian ramp. My heart leaped into my throat. This was the moment. Brenda naturally saw him indicating, saw the spot, saw her opportunity. With a complete lack of hesitation, she accelerated slightly, whipped her oversized vehicle into the spot, cutting the veteran off so abruptly he had to hit his brakes hard. His older car dipped forward with a sudden stop. She didn't even bother to straighten out properly, leaving the rear of her SUV angled slightly into the driving lane. The veteran just sat there for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel. I could see his shoulders slump again, that same look of profound weariness washing over his face. He rested his head back against the seat, closing his eyes briefly. Brenda, meanwhile, leaped out of her car, locked it, chirp chirp, and started towards the walkway, completely oblivious, or perhaps indifferent, to the man she'd just wronged yet again. No, not this time. The sight of the veteran's fatigue, coupled with the fresh knowledge of her spa-day deception, solidified everything. Taking a deep, centering breath, I marched towards Brenda, my footsteps echoing slightly in the concrete structure. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice louder and firmer than I expected. Brenda stopped mid-stride, turning with an expression of pure annoyance. "What is it now?" she snapped, clearly recognizing me as the parking monitor from her perspective. Before I could reply, the veteran had opened his door and was slowly, carefully extricating himself from his car, leaning heavily on his cane. He made his way towards us, his face lined with tiredness, but also a flicker of quiet resolve. He addressed Brenda directly, his voice soft but carrying surprising weight. "Ma'am," he began, "I saw you pull in. That was the last accessible space. I have a physical therapy appointment I cannot miss." Walking from the upper levels, it's very difficult for me today. Would you please consider moving your vehicle? Brenda let out an exaggerated, theatrical sigh. Oh, my God, she exclaimed, rolling her eyes, so hard I thought they might get stuck. Is this garage full of whiners today? Look, I told you before, I'm busy. Go find another spot. It's not rocket science. She waved a dismissive hand towards the upper levels. That was the breaking point. Actually, I stepped forward, positioning myself directly in her path. You're not busy with anything in the medical center. You're going to the spa again, aren't you? Brenda's jaw tightened, her eyes flashing behind the dark lenses of her sunglasses. How dare you? She hissed, lowering her voice to a menacing whisper. Are you stalking me? I swear I am calling security right now. And the police. You are harassing me. She fumbled in her enormous tote bag, presumably for her phone. Go right ahead, I replied, matching her quiet intensity. But they already know. I informed garage security about your pattern last week. They know you continuously misuse these designated spots. They know you park here and go to the spa, not the clinic. I gestured towards the veteran, who was standing silently, watching us, his presence a powerful testament to the reality of the situation. And they know you take spots away from people like this gentleman, who genuinely needs them. Brenda looked momentarily stunned, her hand frozen halfway into her bag. Her face flushed a blotchy red. You did what? You liar. You interfering busybody. As if summoned by the escalating tension, Dave, the older security guard, appeared around the corner, accompanied by a younger, sterner-looking colleague. They walked towards us with purpose. Brenda immediately shifted tactics, turning her venom on them. Officer. Thank goodness. This woman, she pointed dramatically at me, is completely unhinged. She's been following me, harassing me, and this man, she gestured vaguely at the veteran, is trying to intimidate me into giving up my parking spot. You need to remove them immediately. Dave held up a hand, stopping her tirade. He looked squarely at Brenda, his expression serious. Ma'am, we need to talk about your vehicle being parked in this disabled spot without a valid permit. We've received multiple complaints, and we have credible information, he glanced briefly at me, that you are not using the medical facilities associated with this parking designation. He paused. Can you provide proof of a medical appointment or visitor validation for today? Brenda sputtered, cornered. I don't have to show you anything. This is ridiculous. I demand to speak to your supervisor. That won't be necessary, ma'am. The younger guard interjected calmly, holding up a small electronic device. We've logged previous incidents involving this license plate in accessible zones. Given your inability to provide justification and the documented pattern of misuse, we are issuing a citation for illegal parking in a disabled zone. Dave nodded. Furthermore, due to repeated violations and flagrant disregard for garage policy and state law regarding accessible parking, your vehicle is being towed immediately at your expense. He raised his radio to his mouth. Dispatch. Request tow truck for illegal park in disabled zone. Level 1, Bay C. The explosion was spectacular. Brenda went from sputtering denial to full-blown meltdown in seconds. She shrieked, a high-pitched, nails-on-a-chalkboard sound that echoed through the garage. She called us every vile name imaginable. She threatened lawsuits, ruination, claimed powerful connections. Bystanders started to gather at a distance, drawn by the commotion, their faces a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. She even tried to physically block Dave when he stepped towards her car, planting herself in front of the bumper. You touch my car, and I'll sue you into oblivion. Her threats were utterly futile. Within minutes, the flashing yellow lights of a tow truck appeared, navigating down the ramp. The driver, a burly man with an air of seen-it-all boredom, got out, completely unfazed by Brenda's continued screaming. He efficiently hooked up her pristine SUV, the chains rattling loudly. Brenda watched, aghast, as the hydraulics whined and her expensive vehicle was lifted ignominiously off the ground, its front wheels dangling. Her mouth hung open, her face a mask of incandescent rage and disbelief. The flashing lights illuminated her perfectly coiffed hair, and the tears of fury starting to stream down her cheeks. As the tow truck began to carefully maneuver the SUV away, Dave calmly wrote out the citation and attempted to hand it to Brenda. She snatched it, crumpled it violently in her fist, and threw the wad of paper onto the greasy concrete floor, letting out one final, frustrated scream before realizing she was now stranded, carless, and utterly defeated. Dave stooped to pick up the citation. He exchanged a few words with the younger guard, who made notes on his device. Then, Dave turned to the veteran, who had watched the entire spectacle with a quiet, stoic dignity. "Sir," Dave said, his voice gentle again, "the spot is yours now. Please proceed." The veteran looked from the retreating tow truck to the beautifully empty blue space, and then at me. A slow smile spread across his face, erasing some of the lines of fatigue. It was a smile of profound relief. He nodded, got back into his sedan, and pulled smoothly into the spot he so desperately needed. As he got out, leaning on his cane, he walked over to me before heading towards the clinic. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't need to say more. Watching him finally able to park, watching Brenda fume impotently on the curb, watching the tow truck disappear up the ramp, it wasn't triumph I felt. Not exactly. It was a deep, quiet sense of rightness. Justice served cold, with a side of tow fees. The immediate aftermath was almost anticlimactic after Brenda's volcanic eruption. She stood there for a few more minutes, muttering furiously into her phone, likely arranging a ride and complaining bitterly to whoever was on the other end. Eventually, she stalked off towards the main road, defeated and radiating bitterness. The small crowd of onlookers dispersed, shaking their heads or exchanging quiet comments. Dave gave me a final, appreciative nod before he and his colleague resumed their patrol. "Could be looking at several $100s in fines and fees," he remarked quietly before turning away. Hopefully, that sends a message. The most important thing, though, was seeing the veteran. He had already disappeared into the VA clinic, presumably on his way to his physical therapy appointment without the added burden of pain and stress from a long, unnecessary walk. Knowing he got the access he needed, that the system, however slowly, worked to protect that space for him, that felt incredibly significant. In the days and weeks that followed, I did notice a difference. Maybe it was Brenda's very public towing spectacle, maybe security was just more present, but the accessible spots near the medical and VA entrances seemed more consistently occupied by vehicles with actual permits. I saw the veteran eyed, helped a couple more times. He'd be pulling into or out of one of the blue spots, and we'd share a brief, knowing look, a silent acknowledgement of the battle won. It felt good. Reflecting on the whole ordeal, it's clear that what Brenda did wasn't just rule-breaking. It was a fundamental lack of respect for other human beings, particularly those facing physical challenges. My decision to intervene wasn't born from a desire for drama or revenge, though I'll admit the sight of her car being towed was undeniably satisfying. It came from a place of deep frustration with witnessing repeated injustice and recognizing that sometimes staying silent allows entitlement to flourish. Accessible parking isn't a luxury or a convenience. It's a necessity that allows people with disabilities equal access to essential services, healthcare, and community life. Defending that principle, even in a small way, felt important. Brenda hopefully learned a costly lesson about consequences that day. But more importantly, a space designed for need, not privilege, was reclaimed. And watching that veteran finally pull into his rightful spot, knowing he could get the care he deserved without unnecessary hardship, that was the real victory, a quiet affirmation that standing up, even when it's uncomfortable, can make a tangible difference. And that feeling? That's better than any revenge.